G'day everyone, welcome back to a Two and Under podcast, the Southern Hemisphere's biggest and best podcast, all things Newcastle United. I'm joined tonight by Jack. Jack, how are you, mate?
Pretty cold, but apart from that, I'm fine.
Oh, yeah, the big freeze in Queensland. Oh my God, what a bloody disaster this is. It was only
Let me
15
tell you,
today.
this Arctic wind. I'm not being funny here. It's a real thing. When you're used to Queensland weather, and when you've acclimatized like me, yeah, it's been about 15 degrees, but believe me, that feels cold when you're used to what we're used to.
Yeah. What were your feels like on your?
It was a feels like 7, so that is pretty cold.
So that's the real temperature for me.
Yeah,
whatever it feels like, that's what it actually is.
Yeah, it's good for running in the morning. I will give it that.
It's great for running in the morning, yeah.
But it's not good for general walking around.
No.
But yeah, never mind. We'll get over it.
Yeah. It'll be 20 tomorrow, so don't stress, mate. Thought we'd jump on tonight. It's been, maybe 24 hours or so since Gareth Southgate handed in his resignation after 8 years in charge of the national team. He probably started off as an overachiever and ended up an underachiever over his 8 years, which is pretty good going, I think, in terms of the way you view a manager and stuff. But what's happened now is it's put in sharp focus his replacement. And looking at my Sportsbet account today, apart from the grim tally on the top right-hand corner, I had a look at the market and they've got our Eddie Howe as a narrow favourite ahead of Graham Potter with Lee Carsley, who is the manager of the under-21s. A third in the line of betting. Jack, what do you think and what do you make about all this sort of stuff?
Yeah, it's probably been something that's been there for a little while as a possibility. Whenever you've got an English manager doing a good job, who would seem to be a good fit for that job as well, because you need a very specific skill set to be able to do it. And Eddie certainly seems like he's got that. So it's been there as a possibility. I think the club have tried to guard against this with secret contract extensions and buyout clauses and whatever he might have. I think that they know what they've got with him. So they won't let him go without a fight. I'm sure we'll talk about sort of the chances of it actually happening. Yesterday, when Southgate did resign, it all became a bit real that it might happen, that it's a bit of a possibility. So you've got the feelings of being worried. You don't want the disruption to come. We don't want to lose such a good manager as well. So then we started thinking about some pros and cons for him, what he might be thinking in his mind. So yeah, it's just got to a point where I hope it's sorted out quickly, and I think it will be, hopefully by the end of this week. Obviously, the players are away in Germany, but it'd be nice to have clarity one way or another. But at the same time, there's nothing they can really do unless there is an approach. The FA aren't under any obligation to come out and approach him anytime soon if they don't want. So this might drag on for a little while longer yet, and it'll be interesting to see what he says on Friday. But yeah, he might have a decision to make at some point soon.
Yeah, so, yeah, like you said, I think the FA, there's no timeline on when they need to do it. I think the next the round of Nations games in September, I think I heard. So
it's about 6 weeks, yeah.
Yeah. So ideally, they'd probably like to get something sorted by then, but there's no rush to do it. They can kind of organise it all before they come into camp for that. And I think this press conference Friday is going to be pretty pivotal. Whether he just rules himself out straight away and we can just put it all to bed and move on. But if he doesn't knock it on the head and leaves the door ajar, then there's probably going to be alarm bells, because I was thinking about this today and I'm happy to be wrong, but I think he's the best English manager in the world at the moment. Would that be fair? I couldn't think of who else you'd have ahead of him.
Yeah. No, it's not a great list, in fairness, and it hasn't been for quite a while. I think the last English manager to win the league was Howard Wilkinson which was before the Premier League even existed.
Well, I think when he finished top 4, it was the highest finish of an English manager for a long time as well.
Yeah, Harry Redknapp had a good run with Spurs, but other than that, it's been pretty slim pickings. So if you're the FA, really, you look at the profile of the kind of manager they want for that job. It has to be someone who's pretty good with the media. He's pretty squeaky clean. He's not going to get in any controversy. Eddie fits the bill there. Somebody who's calm, balanced, all of the things that he is, that Southgate was good at. I think that they'd want probably someone who's a better sort of tactical manager, coach than Southgate, which I think Eddie probably is. So if I was the FA, he'd be the first choice by an absolute mile, really. I think it's pretty much all of their boxes. So yeah, I think his body of work with Newcastle, but even with Bournemouth before that as well, suggests that he's got it in him to do that job. It's a massive job. Like the scrutiny that he's had at Newcastle over the 2.5-3 years he's been here. There is scrutiny. There's a lot of scrutiny at Newcastle and a lot of media interest, but England's a different kettle of fish. So yeah, I think he probably has got the attributes to do it. If I was the FA, he'd absolutely be the first choice. But I'm hoping for our sake that he isn't and that the lever's alone. But we'll just see what happens.
I don't think it's going to happen. No. All right, we'll get stuck in. So you and me have both. We haven't spoken about this, so this could go anywhere as we kind of roll through. But we'll go through our pros and cons as to why we'll put ourselves in Eddie Howe's position, and we'll sort of go through the pros and cons of how he might think and what they are about the job and stuff like that. And now, like I said, we haven't spoken about this, so this could end up anywhere. So maybe you have one, I'll have one, and we'll kind of work through our list and we'll see where we get to. So I'll give you the new ball and you can open the ball.
So the way I did this was I looked at it in terms of his current job at Newcastle. I looked at push factors, things that might push him away from Newcastle, and pull factors, so things that are keeping him here. And then I did the same with England. So I looked at the push factors, things that might put him off taking that job. And then the pull factors, the things that are really drawing him in. I'll start with England. The pull factors, I think this is a massive one. And I think this really is something he will be thinking about and have to consider if he gets the opportunity. It's England. It's England. He's English. He is from the south, and Southerners seem to have more of an affinity with the England national team than Northerners do. Like, I'm English, but I don't care. Like, I'm much more.
You're not anymore, you're not, mate. Sorry.
No, not anymore. Yeah. Actually, that's true. That's true. Since last year,
you don't give a shit about England anymore, bud. We can talk about Graham Arnold another day on another podcast now because he's your national manager.
That's true. Actually, I forgot I was Australian now. But
I think that's not Australian to say.
I think for an Australian, for any manager, any English manager, I think it's kind of the ultimate goal. And I think he's said himself, he's used that word. He said when he spoke to Gary Neville 2 months ago, he said it's the ultimate for any manager, So I think that's a really big, massive pull factor that might take him to England. And also, he might be worried that if he doesn't take this opportunity now, he might be worried that he might not get that chance again. And I think that will be a huge factor playing on his mind with this decision, because there's a lot pulling him to keep him at Newcastle. But those two things, we can't compete with England as a national club, a national team. And I think this might be the one job in the world at this point that he would consider leaving Newcastle for. So that's what I'm really worried about with this. If he is approached, I think that's the main thing that might just tip him over to go in.
And even so, that were two of mine that I've just crossed out. So good stuff. I'm glad we're kind of thinking along the same thing. Also, in terms of him and his coaching journey to where he is now, his stock's never been higher than what it is right now. Now, who knows what'll happen in 6 months' time? Like, if we get off to a bad start, he kind of doesn't have his allies in Amanda and Medad around anymore that had his back probably more than what everyone else did, at least publicly anyway. And I think privately they probably did. And he hasn't got that kind of backing anymore. So if things don't start well by Christmas, I think like he could be in serious doubt with his job. But just backing over like the Amanda and Medad stuff, I think that there's a bit more to that than meets the eye. I think it's not just a money kind of, we don't have the funds to sort of pour in anymore as much as the PIF and the Rubens do. So yeah, I do think there's more at play, and I don't think it was planned, judging by some of the reactions on social media from the players and stuff like that. They seem to be blindsided by it. So he doesn't have that. And yeah, like imagine something did happen and he lost his job at some stage during the season, and he'd be kicking himself that he didn't take this when it was up, because like Southgate was in there for 8 years. Like it could be a long time to get another opportunity to do it.
Yeah. What you've said about Amanda and Mehrdad Guddusi as well, I think is important, because they're the ones who've said in various interviews through the last 2.5 years that they love Eddie. They think that they want him to be the Alex Ferguson. So they were big allies for him at the club, and the sort of power base that he had was dependent on them to an extent. It has been good to see Darren Eales come out and say, "We love Eddie." That's what he actually said in the interviews he did with the press in the last 24 hours or so. So I think that the hierarchy do appear to value him still, which they'd be crazy not to after what he's achieved. But you definitely do have to think, there's the new executive structure there now, which you could look at in two ways. You could look at as this is worrying for him because his power base is gone, and he's working with new people. But you could also look at it that it's the sign of the club, showing their ambition and getting key people in key positions, and driving the club forward. So there's two ways of looking at it. But what you've said there as well about his stock, you're right there. His stock will never be as high. Well, hopefully it will be, but
yeah.
it's as high as it's ever been now. And it could get higher if he does well. And of course, he'll back himself. He will back himself to push this club forward and bring it to where it needs to be. And then his stock will be even higher. But you're definitely right. Football's a fickle sport. He knows that. So he knows that. He experienced it back in December, January, when there was support. Quite a lot of supporters were starting to question, and I don't know if it was just a social media thing, but before that Sunderland game, there definitely was significant pressure on him. And I think if that game,
and we were in a rut too.
We were in a rut, and it was the first time he'd really struggled since he came in. But he's not a stupid man. He knows that there's going to be pressure, but pressure's not a bad thing necessarily. But he knows that this is a fickle sport, and that the owners are maybe it's a bit more unpredictable now. So this might just be playing on his mind a little bit if and when he comes to make this decision.
Yeah, so I had as well, and his work ethic and stuff like that's been really, really well documented, and that could kind of be a con as well. But you look at it from the family side, given he's doing sometimes he's 6 till 6 at the club, maybe 5-6 days a week, doesn't leave much time for family time. And the England job, it's not that. Like you kind of fly around watching players and stuff like that. I'm sure you'd probably have a few meetings in between the international windows, and then you get a short burst of maybe 2 weeks or 10 days or so with players to prepare for games, and then it's kind of back. They go back and you go back to kind of watching them and stuff like that. So that maybe the hook of spending more time with his family and everything like that could definitely be a carrot, unless sometimes he's like you and I, Jack, with our kids, that you could love nothing more than to get away from them because they're doing your head in. But I think that would also be a factor in his decision making. The opportunity to, hopefully his kids aren't. I think they're a bit older than what ours are, mate. So he probably doesn't have them problems, and the opportunity to maybe watch them play sport on a weekend and spend some time with them and have dinner with them and pick them up from school or drop them off at school and all that, mate. That's probably coming into the calculations as well.
Yeah, like there's no question about that. That's the side of football managers and football players that you don't often consider as a fan when you're looking at players moving around and managers going to different places. But I think on the flip side from that as well, his family have just moved up from the south.
So I had that in, I had that in my cons as well.
That's a pull factor for him to stay at Newcastle. Yeah. Like his kids are up, they're playing in football teams, they've settled into school by all accounts, and they've settled well into life in the northeast. He's made the commitment when he signed to to come up and to bring his family and to really make a go of it. So I think the fact his family are in the area now is a reason for him to stay. But on the other factor, if he was to go to England, his family could go back to their base in the south, and he could live with them in his normal house. And like you said, he'd have more time for them. Whether he's the sort of manager who wants more time, it doesn't seem like that. He seems to thrive off the workaholic, the nature of club management. But yeah, I'm hoping he sees this as something he could do in the future. But it's just whether he gets that opportunity, whether he's going to get that opportunity again, is what he has to weigh up.
Yeah. What else did you have? That's all I had for reasons why he would take the job.
I had that he's a good fit for the FA. So yeah, they've got a really good setup at St George's Park there as well. So it's a structure that I think he would enjoy and he'd fit well into. I had that the England job is kind of a simpler job in some ways. You don't have all of the PSR nonsense and everything that goes along with club management. You don't have to deal with that. So it's got less sort of outside complications in a way. The World Cup in 2026, it's 2 years away. He'd be going and managing in the World Cup in 2 years with a team that really should be
one
getting
of the favourites.
Semi-final, be one of the favourites.
Yeah.
The England squad, it's a good squad to work with. Any manager would want to work with that bunch of players as well. So I think there are compelling reasons, and it just depends how much weight he would put onto these different various factors. Like it's different for everyone. Everyone's got to make decisions at some point about whether to take another job or whether to make a move. So you put more weight on some decisions than others. But I definitely think there are compelling reasons for him, if he's offered this job, to actually accept it. And I think if he did, we would just have to hold our hands up as a fan base and say,
yeah, well,
what can you do?
Can't do anything about it.
It's your nation, and it's the one job that he probably would have, the only job that he probably would have left us for at this point. So you can't really, even though it'd be devastating in some ways, you can't really begrudge him if he was to do it.
Yeah. All right. It's starting to get me down this. Let's start talking about the reasons why he's not going to take the job and he's going to stay with us.
Yeah.
You can go first again.
All right. So what I have with the hierarchy, like I said, the hierarchy appeared to value him. And that was a big one I had. He's got his new contract. So he's actually been given 2 new contracts. This was a secret one that no one knew about.
Yeah.
Which he apparently signed last summer after the Champions League qualification. So no one knows how long it is, but it's got a significant buyout in it apparently. So I think the club.
Well, I read it doesn't have a buyout at all.
Doesn't. So it's just a negotiation.
So they can basically name their price if he does decide to take it. Then a bit like the Darren Ashworth stuff. Dan Ashworth. They can name their price and sort of work from there, which they probably might have to put to try and pay out a nut that he's incoming manager, so it won't actually count for the PSR stuff. But even that. Yeah, go.
Yeah, I was just going to say they've backed him, and they, even though he had his tough spell at times last year, I think the club will accept their part in that, and he's still got that credit in the bank. So they've really backed him, and it's been good that Darren Eales has come out, and I know that it's part of a negotiation strategy as well. If the FA do come, the club are going to say we don't want to lose him absolutely, and drive the best bargain we can. But I think that's a big reason why he might stay. If he feels that love and he feels that support from the club, I think that'll help. That'll give him a harder decision to make than if they were saying they weren't bothered.
Yeah, and I think like he's just signed this new deal as well. And from what I think Keith Downey might have said overnight as well, that he'd be taking a pay cut to take the England job. He'd be getting more at Newcastle. So I know money's not everything, but money helps every. And then if you're going to move jobs and take a pay cut, I think that's a pretty big decision you'd have to make as well. Not that he'd be living week to week or anything like that. I'm sure he's pretty financially stable, but you just got to. This stuff comes into it. Like you've got to work out what's best for everyone. What else did you have?
The big one, and I think this will be for him a really huge factor, is the day-to-day coaching on the grass. Like that, that's what he seems to thrive from. That that working with the players, building the relationships, teaching them how to do what he wants them to do, and we saw the benefit of that over his last 2.5 years. And we also saw the difficulty when he didn't have as much time when we had all the Europe to play and things, and which was a big adjustment and a big adaptation for him, which has been a learning curve for him to learn from. But I think that's a really big one. England's not really about coaching players. It's about trying to fit the best, however many players you've got at a given time. And that can change with injury and trying to, I guess, manage the egos, which Gareth Southgate did extremely well, probably until this tournament, where there seemed to be a little bit more creeping in, mainly with Bellingham, to be fair, who seemed to come in without that, not quite the same team ethos that they'd had for a while. So it's more about managing personalities and trying to, set the team up tactically in a way that can get results in tournaments, but definitely not about repetition and constant training and coaching of the players, improving and developing them. And I think that's where his real skill set and his real strength as a manager is, and why he's so well suited to club management. His passion.
Yeah, I think he loves that sort of stuff, is improving players, and that position, you'd have a very small part, if any, in improving any players. You just basically improve them by finding a niche role for them in the team. And I think we won't do a deep dive into another country's coach, but it did seem like he just picked kind of his best front 6 players and put them all in and hope it worked, rather than have more of a structure to it and have the balls, I guess, to maybe drop a Phil Foden or someone like that to better suit the way they wanted to play. But on the other hand, maybe that's how he wanted to play. He was a defender by nature, and he probably just was planning on, we just got to not lose, and you kind of got him all the way to the final. I think like it did against Italy in the last one too. But yeah, he just probably didn't have that little bit extra to push him to go again.
I think Eddie would find it really frustrating to get the players for 2 weeks or even 10 days, and then have sort of 5 days before a game, 2 games, and then for everyone to just go straight away. Like he goes and analyzes the matches, like he does it straight after the
trainings.
Game. And he does it on mute straight after the game, so he's not influenced by the crowd sound, he said before. So he could do that for England, but then it'd be another 3 months until he meets up with the team again, and then it might be a different set of players. So it's like, I'm sure he would adapt to it. I'm sure he wouldn't have any problems in adjusting, but at this point of his career, I just think he's built something up here at Newcastle where the players, it's his team now as well, so that they've developed in this what he wants them to do, and he's got much more potential to be even better. And I think that he'd really miss that. I think if he went to England, and he'd have to adapt to doing it, to managing in a completely different style, which I think, like I said before, he definitely wants to do it at some point, to challenge and push himself into it. But I'm hoping that this just comes a bit too soon for him. He's only 46. He could have, England are going to have, another probably 5 or 6 managers probably by the time he retires. So I think hopefully he's going to have other opportunities in the future.
Yeah, but even just back on the training stuff, like you always see a player say how intense and how hard his training is. I remember when Anthony Gordon come, that he was speaking very candidly about the difference between the training at Everton and the training when he got to the club, and how he wasn't up to it. Like he physically couldn't go like the other players, and you can't do that when these players come in. Like some of them, like you could be flying to the other side of the world for like World Cup qualifiers and things like that, like long haul flights to Europe. You can't just get off a plane and flog them like you normally would, like maybe twice a week at Clubland. So that'd be a real hard adjustment, I think, for someone who's kind of built himself to be that manager and to squeeze the lemon as much as he can out of his players. So that's the thing as well. And another thing I was thinking of too was he's very loyal to his backroom team. So that's part of the reason why he didn't get the Celtic job before ours come up, was because Celtic weren't prepared to sort of pay for Tyndall and the other guys. I can't even remember what their names are, but they weren't prepared to cough up for them. Now I think England's got their own kind of coaching structure, and the assistant coaches kind of float in and out like Graham Jones did a few years ago too. So I think he's pretty loyal to his team, and I don't know if they'd let him bring them all in.
I think Eddie fits well into England. I'm not sure Jason Tyndall does.
Yeah, not quite.
I don't know how he'd go around St George's Park, where you've got to sort of like behave properly,
toe the line a little bit.
There's sort of standards of decorum and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that's a good point that I hadn't thought about, actually. I don't think that would be a deal breaker, but I think it'd definitely be something for him to consider.
Yeah, and that'd definitely come up. Now, before you go on, I'll give you my last one, and then you can finish this off. So this one is he prepared for the backlash when he picks Sean Longstaff to play for England at a major tournament? Now, like you said earlier, the media, they can be a bit brutal in the Northeast, but then the national media, when it comes to the national team, are another thing. Like, you've got every major paper, you've got Sky Sports, you've probably got all the major TV stations, the BBC and all that in it as well. Is he prepared for the backlash when Sean Longstaff starts next to Declan Rice at the next major tournament?
Dan Burnett left back.
Yeah.
It's funny, isn't it? Because it's really hard to sort of describe the England fans and the England media reaction to adversity. And we've had a few conversations throughout the course of this tournament where it's like England are progressing and winning games and winning the group and getting to the final.
And the world's caving in.
Yeah, the world's caving in. And I can see how ridiculous that can appear to outsiders. But at the same time, when you've been brought up in that culture, it's just sort of like that. In 2018, England, everything was really exciting unexpectedly when England were underdogs. And then as the years have gone on, they've got sort of better players and there's become more and more expectation. Eddie doesn't really react much to sort of criticism that he's got or sort of fan opinion about things. He says that he's not on social media and he tries to sort of block it out. But you can't do that really with England. It's impossible. Like, look at what happened to Southgate. This tournament, there was he was being asked about Gary Lineker's comments in press conferences, and him and the players all got pretty chippy actually about it this time. So they definitely let it get under the skin a bit. And Gareth Southgate's one of the most sort of probably just sort of balanced and calm and dignified people you can get. So even he was getting frustrated and getting upset by it. So I think Eddie would know that it was coming, but it'd be a completely different level to anything he's experienced before. And I've seen comments as well about how he didn't satisfy the national media's sort of desire for him to say something when they were asking him about the Saudi ownership of Newcastle. I think people wanted him to come out and criticize his employers or something like that, which is just not going to happen. And
ridiculous.
He just said, I'm a football manager, so I don't think about these other things. And he said, I'll have to go and educate myself. And then they asked him in the future, have you educated yourself yet? And he just sort of gave a politician's diplomatic answer, batting it off again. Like, if you get difficult questions like that as an England manager, you kind of have to have an opinion on other things. And this is what Gareth Southgate was extremely good at. Understanding what he had to say to the media to keep them happy, and he made comments about kind of social issues and things, which is sort of expected of the England manager, which Southgate was good at, which Eddie Howe's not been used to before. And to be honest, like, he can't be bothered about that. He just wants to be managing football teams and coaching players.
I don't think he wants to. He'd love to not do another press conference.
Exactly. Yeah. No. Exactly. Like, he tolerates it, and he's a bit boring really in press conferences sometimes. Obviously, we hang off his every word because what he says is interesting to us, but like, you can see how journalists might get frustrated because he never really says anything particularly interesting. He just, other than
Yeah,
lying
very
about
vanilla.
his players' fitness, like he's very
Yeah.
vanilla. Like in press conferences, he's very vanilla. He's clearly not when he's coaching, and that's where he sort
No.
of focuses his energy. So yeah, that's another reason. That's another reason why he might not want the hassle. But again, I don't think that would be a deal breaker for him. I think he would
No.
adapt, and he would know that that was part and parcel of it.
Yeah, I think Andy Sixsmith, friend of the pod's the only one to get a bit of a rise out of him at press conferences with some kind of off-center questions that he's not quite ready for that he gets a laugh out of. But yeah, apart from that, she's straight down the barrel, no veering off the path or anything like that. Just half volleys. Yeah, we're not sure about him, and like 3/4 of the time he's lying about players' fitness and availability and all that anyway. So, um, I I was gonna touch on who, if the worst did happen and he did leave, who would be thinking about replacing him, but I don't want to touch that until I don't want to jinx it or anything like that. We'll just leave that need be, and we'll if it does happen, then we'll probably have a pod about it and work out what our options are and what we think might be a good option for us going forward.
I'll just finish with a big one as well. A big one to keep him here. Like he's spent 2.5 years building up these relationships, building his squad, getting them into the patterns of play he wants, training them exactly how he wants them to. Like, we are fans, so we lap up any time managers or players say that they love the club and they love the area and stuff like that. But I really do, and I know that he's a southerner and he's not from the area, but I really do think he's grown a real strong affinity with the area, with
Yeah,
the fan
absolutely.
base,
He's
with
brought into the
with the
area.
club. He's bought into the club. He's understood what the club has needed at that time, and I think he knows, having come so close, what it would do for him if he managed to win a trophy. And I don't think he's an egotistical manager, so he wouldn't
Yeah,
wouldn't view it as about him. Like, but if he won a trophy, there'd be statues and
oh,
stadiums named after him and
yeah,
everything. So I don't think he would necessarily want those things. But and he's not like other managers where it's all about them and the ego. But you've got to think, like, everyone loves appreciation and praise. And if he did manage to bring success to the club, which he already has, but if he managed to bring tangible success, and he knows that this is an ambitious project, and that there's money available now to spend, and like I said about the executive structure, the club's catching up with the work that he did with the team on the field. So I think, like, he definitely would feel like he's got unfinished business, and he's just really getting started. Like, he was at Bournemouth for years and years, and then he left, and then he went back again. So this is not someone who is sort of like a mercenary football manager. I think he's, like I said, he's moved his family up. He's
loyal.
completely and utterly bought into what the club's doing, the area, the region. So I think that's a big factor. I think, and I think it would tear him up a little bit. I think if he had to leave at this point, and I think that's another big reason why I think he might stay, along with all the other things.
Yeah, I think if I had to put a bet on now, I'd put my money on him staying, and that's not from a hope point of view. It's just from a, like you said, he's done so much work in such a short space of time, and it kind of feels like you said with the off-field stuff, and we'll quickly touch on Darren Eales' media briefing overnight too, but it feels like we're just about ready to launch, and we probably we kind of felt that way last season, but I think with the injuries and the Champions League, it never really felt like it got going, and it always seemed to be one step forward, three steps back. Like it seemed never ending by the end of it, and we couldn't wait for it to finish, and we probably felt that way from just after the PSG game. If we're all brutally honest, that November, December was hell, and it didn't really get much better after that, and it was still a miracle how we managed to finish seventh. And typical Newcastle, obviously, we don't get that European spot. But with the club, like I said, everything is trending towards the club being in a position where it could really launch and become a powerhouse, not just in the English game, but in the world game as well. And you'd be kicking yourself if you'd done all that work and just as they were about to go, you left and let someone else sort of do it. So yeah, that's a huge thing.
And he's been an integral part of this whole progression since the takeover, and he remains so. And I think he does. Like, I don't think anyone at the club is thinking. Hopefully, they are succession planning because they have to, but I don't think they're thinking, we want to get rid of Eddie Howe at all. I think he's an important part of what they want to do. Like, you'd be hard pressed to find someone who's defended him and who appreciates him more than I do as a supporter. Like, I've written articles and spoken on here so many times about him. So I'd be really upset on one level if he did go. Like I said before, I would understand it if it was England. I wouldn't understand it if it was another club in the Premier League, because I think we are as well placed as any club to have a bright future. But I would understand it if it was England. And I'd be, on the day, 5 years to the day that Steve Bruce was appointed as Newcastle manager.
I've seen that. I didn't want to bring it up, but you just had to go there.
I know, but the reason I'm saying that is because I'd be confident now if the worst happened and Eddie Howe did leave. I don't want to consider that now, and we won't talk about who might come in specifics, but I'd be confident the club have a plan and that they've got someone who fits into their vision and their strategy of what they want to do. So at the same time as being disappointed, I'd be understanding, and I'd also be excited for what Paul Mitchell and what the club wanted to do in the future. But I do feel we're on the verge of something with Eddie Howe as well, and I think he's got the potential and the character and everything needed to become an elite manager, and I hope that happens at Newcastle. And if he does go, it'll be with great thanks, but let's hope he doesn't.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, bringing up Paul Mitchell is a great segue, mate, into, and I swear we haven't rehearsed this at all, but yeah, Darren Eales, people were probably, I wouldn't say clamoring, but asking questions why no one from the club had kind of spoken about the whole PSR deadline and what happened there. And Darren Eales has done a 9-minute little clip it with the club on the club's media channel, and then from kind of what we read, I think he's done maybe a half an hour sit down with some print journos to answer some questions and stuff. So we'll briefly just unpack that for maybe 5 or 10 minutes, Jack. But he spoke about the appointment of Paul Mitchell. So this is a direct quote. Part of the importance of Paul coming in with Eddie is to let Eddie do the strengths he's got and to take away some of the things that it was that Eddie would spend all his time and every walking hour on. So that, and then I think in another, I think that was in a print, but on the club channel, he kind of said that recruiting will be 90% of Paul Mitchell's role. Now, I think Eddie was doing a lot of recruiting. He basically was the director of football or sporting director, whatever you want to call him. But to have that person now to kind of work, I think he'll still have his input, but he'll also work with the analysts and the data nerds and things like that in turn with Paul Mitchell, and kind of really target the players that they think is going to help the club. And yeah, I think he was targeted, I think, for his recruiting background from what Darren Eales has said. So that's a sort of a good positive and a good little insight of how they think this is all going to work going forward as well. And they did speak about the PSR deadline and stuff like that. So after June the 30th, the 3-year cycle kind of kicks in again. So the last one had dropped off, which meant 70 million had drops off the books from that 3 years ago. The club are going to be really innovative and think outside the box when it comes to transfers and how they can maximise their spending money, whether that be loans or free transfers. We've seen with Lloyd Kelly and stuff like that. And little interesting tidbit as well. I'm not sure this has probably been spoken about, but I can't remember it. So when they arrived at the club, they were generating about 140 million pounds in revenue. By the end of the season, the takeover season was up to 180, and then it was 250, and last season was over 300 million in revenue. So they've kind of grown by about 30% each year, which is pretty remarkable. Well, it is a bit remarkable, but when you consider that there was barely anything going on in the commercial side of things before the takeover, it's pretty big. Now, this season we'll have the Adidas deal, so that sort of stuff kicks in, as well as all the club sort of store with the money coming back into the club, with the opportunity for a training kit sponsor as well. You think that'd be kind of in the works, as well as perhaps a training ground sponsor. And if Craig gets his way, there'll be £150 million naming rights sponsor for St James's Park as well, which will be handy. But the key little line that I took away was, hopefully they'll be in a position to announce some new deals soon. So they're obviously in negotiations with, maybe not the stadium at the moment, but definitely a training kit and maybe training ground sponsor as well. So, yeah, what did you, quick little 5-minute summation of, you've obviously read and listened to the Darren Eales stuff. What did you make of it all?
Yeah, it's good to have the communication, and it circles back to kind of what we were saying before about the club is primed to push on. Never mind having people in these key positions. We've now got like a chief operating officer, a chief finance officer. We've got
My mate Pete,
the sporting director. We've got all of these performance analysts. We've got all of these positions, which basically Lee Charnley was trying to do everything when he was there,
which is nuts when you think about it.
And he was getting paid peanuts as well, comparatively. Yeah. So, like, it's taken almost 3 years to actually get this executive structure. And I know that Amanda and Merdad were there, and I think it was probably always the plan that they moved on at some point, because they just haven't got as much money anyway either. So I think that was probably always part of going to be on the agenda at some point. Maybe not now, but yeah, it was good to hear Darren Eales, and he's a good communicator. He's very straight talking, and he says things as they are, and he's very kind of open and honest about the financial situation as well. I think we did get lucky with the PSR, like that was a bit of an escape for us, but thankfully that's done now. There's been a bit of a sort of feeling in the media that it's been a bit chaotic and a bit sort of turmoil the last few weeks, but I don't know. It doesn't feel like that. If you look at what the club are doing, the pre-season looks pretty well planned. There's just the one long haul trip to Japan. So I think the club are sort of definitely ready to take off, which is another big reason for Eddie to stay. The Paul Mitchell stuff was very interesting about the recruitment aspect of his role, because it kind of makes you think I think there was a misconception that Dan Ashworth was kind of like a scout doing recruitment, when it does seem like that is what Paul Mitchell actually is more, so it maybe isn't a bad thing that we managed to sell Dan Ashworth for a world record fee for an executive, because Paul Mitchell seems to fit more into the kind of
what we need,
the requirements of what we need for somebody in that executive position. So, and Eddie hopefully will have, I'm sure he will have input into the transfers. He'll probably have a veto if he definitely doesn't want someone. But hopefully Paul Mitchell's someone he can trust his judgment when he's recommending players. Steve Nixon's still there as well, and he's got a good record of recommending players. Like even back in the day, he was recommending Lacazette and Aubameyang and these players that we couldn't sign.
Who else was it? Was it Modric? Did he?
Modric, I don't know if Modric was before his time, but yeah, definitely that was another big one.
I reckon Dirk Kuyt was one of his as well.
Dirk Kuyt was one, and there was a couple of. Yeah, there's been like some big defenders that we've had a look at, but we didn't push the boat out when Ashley was there. Yeah. So he's still there as well. So and Eddie's got his nephew on the scouting side as well.
Yeah,
Andy. So yeah, no, good. The communication from Darren Eales was really good. It's always nice to hear him talk. So I think it's positive, and we kind of need to see a bit of action in the transfer market. Hopefully before we go to Japan, there'll be at least one player in. But there's going to be no holding back. I think we're going to definitely go out and do that now. But we just need to get this situation hopefully put to bed with Eddie in England. Because if he does go, that'll disrupt things as well, of course, because we'll have to go and find a new manager, and the transfer plans will be up in the air.
Might want a different type of player than what we're probably looking at to start with. So yeah, that is definitely one to watch. So we might wrap that up, mate. I don't want to get too bogged down in the negative talk. We want him to stay, and we want him to stay here for as long as he can and be successful at the club. So thanks everyone for tuning in or watching or listening, however you are consuming us at the moment. Jack, well, hopefully, mate, you can rug up and and you're not freezing when you're out and running, or tomorrow when it feels like bloody 10 degrees, which is a beautiful winter's day here in the People's Republic of Victoria. So good luck with that. Stay tuned. If anything happens, we'll probably have another podcast in a couple of days' time after the Eddie Howe press conference. Hopefully it's a really positive one for us, and we can put all this to bed and move on with our transfer plans and everything else like that, mate. So thanks very much for jumping on.
Thank you very much. I'll see you soon.
Thanks, everyone, for watching and listening. We'll catch you next time.